By round 3, only myself and my opponent, Frank and his military orders, had won 2 games. Tom's Nomads were also undefeated, having had the bye for round 1. I was actually at the top of the table, I think, because one of Frank's victories wasn't major. For once, I was also up against a faction that I had some knowledge of, having played against military orders once previously, plus a tutorial game. Though my knowledge was still quite hazy. But on the other hand, Frank had something of a home ground advantage because we were playing on his board. This was his list. It was a core link of a missile launcher Teutonic Knight and a regular Teutonic Knight, 2 Croziers and a Hacker Order Sergeant. There was also a Harris with Gabriel de Fersen, a Teutonic Knight, and a Black Friar who had a heavy rocket launcher. The rest of his lineup consisted of a Knight of Montesa motorcyclist, a Trinitarian, another Crozier, and some remotes and a Tech Bee. In a lot of ways, it was actually very similar to my list despite lacking a tag. Much to my chagrin, the coalition victory meant that we were playing decapitation with the goal of assassinating Dr. Heck. I was really hoping for Biotech Vor, since I had 3 fire teams which enabled movement and a strong ARO presence to slow that of my opponent, as well as the fact that my lieutenant was a crappy Kaisotsu. Despite that, and despite the fact that the ninja is actually a better assassin than an Oniwaban, against 1 wound or low armor models at least, I decided to go with my TR bot list again, just because it had been working so well for me. And also, I had a look at the board, and these barrels were high enough to give it an extremely good view of about half the board. At this stage, it would have shocked me if I won the lieutenant role, but what did shock me was that my opponent let me take initiative. Even better, he let me have the side of the board with the barrels, so I once again reserve dropped the TR bot there. I also put Scarface there so that Cordelia could hopefully service both the TR bot and Scarface. Even though the barrels were slightly shorter than S7, they were so much only slightly shorter that I was hopeful that it would be impossible to get an angle where Guts wasn't possible. Yojimbo also went on that right flank with the intention of herring up the side of the board to do some damage. My core fire team was placed here, with the Kaisotsu here not being a part of it, instead being my lieutenant, because this was an extremely good spot in which to hide him, as the railing made it very hard to see into, with this being the only vantage point which could get line of sight on a prone model. The fact that there wasn't a building directly beneath the balcony also meant that climbing onto it would have been extremely difficult. Frank also didn't have a missile bot or a speculative fire weapon or anything that could super jump, so I felt he was pretty safe, especially with the missile launcher tanker on the roof. Matt actually played on this board earlier in the day, and it was actually an extra story higher, so there wouldn't have been anywhere that could see into the balcony if we'd played on this board earlier, and that would have made it pretty much invulnerable, except to repeated climbs. My Harris was behind the same building, ready to advance right from the outset. I scattered my Kaisotsu watching the rear as usual. As about 40% of the objective points in this mission are dedicated to killing the HVTs, I put them on opposite sides of the board here and here. Frank had the opposite idea, putting his on either side of this police car, where they could be overwatched by most of his troopers. As for his actual deployment, it's hard to see in this picture, but as I just intimated, both of his fire teams were on and behind this building, near the police cars. His heavy flamethrower bot was up on this rooftop with the Ox bot just behind it. The Knight of Montesa was somewhere back here, and the rest of his loose models were on or behind this building and the bridge between the 2 buildings. The first turn of this game for both players took about an hour, which isn't great in a tournament with 2-hour games that included deployment and so on. The fact was that we were so evenly matched in terms of long-range firepower and would set up strong defensive positions. For my first turn, the issue was that both the heavy rocket launcher Black Friar and the missile launcher Teutonic Knight could see Scarface and Yojimbo right at the start. The Teutonic Knight could also see the Daiokai and the Daiyokai's bad range, meaning that he'll be hitting on 7s against the Teutonic Knight's 17s. After wasting several minutes prevaricating, I decided to bite the bullet and move Scarface to the left, splitting his burst evenly against the inevitable AROs. Scarface obliterated the Black Friar, but lost the face-to-face against the missile launcher Teutonic Knight and was hit once. He failed all 3 explosive saves despite having 7 base armor and cover, and immediately went unconscious. This was a disastrous result for the very first roll of the game, especially since he'd immediately take 2 more unopposed missiles to the face if I repaired him with Cordelia. Therefore, I bit the bullet again and moved the Harris up the long way and got into a better range band for the Diokai's multi-marksman rifle and took the face-to-face roll with the Teutonic Knight again. From here. Incredibly, the exact same thing happened again and the Diokai was obliterated by a single hit. Worse, as he only has 2 wounds and no wound in cap, he was completely off the table. Incredibly, in only 2 face-to-face rolls, I'd lost my 2 primary models and well over a third of my points, in a mission where points are the most common way of winning. In despair, I turned to my ARO piece, the missile launcher Tanko, and locked him onto his counterpart across the street. Despite being an almost identical role, with the Teutonic Knight actually being slightly favoured thanks to the +1 BS from being in a 5-man team, I finally blew him away. And this revealed the one thing which gave me some faint hope at this die stage of the game. Frank had misdeployed his lieutenant so that, even prone, he could be seen by the Tanko. Immediately I obliterated him as well. The rest of my orders were spent repairing Scarface, which, despite taking a lot of orders, only got on to 1 point of HP because I was incapable of rolling a success without immediately thereafter rolling a fail, and it doesn't have remote presence to enable command token rerolls. Unfortunately, the debacle that was my first turn meant that Yojimbo was stuck where he'd been deployed, and the Digger and Tanko here were in no man's land, without +1 burst or the Diokai to protect them. Frank chose a new lieutenant very close to the first one, but blocked by this stack from that same fire lane. For his first turn, after much consideration, he used a coordinated order to kill the TR bot with Deferson, because I can't split, you're not allowed to split fire in ARO. This was an extremely intelligent move. Then he brought the Knight of Montesa down this flank and cautious moved him over the street to the other side of the alley here, which avoided the arrows from Scarface and the Digger. After the game, Frank realised that it was illegal to cautious move motorcyclists, but neither of us realised during the game, and with a dodge of 13 and armor 4, it's likely he would have been fine anyway. Of course, if he'd attempted and failed the dodge, it would have been a very different game, because the Montesa proceeded to sweep down my back line, wounding the missile launcher Tanko and killing several Kaisotsu, before ending the turn hiding at the bottom left of the table down here. Though we did take a wound from a Kaisotsu arrow. The flamethrower remote also took a shot at Yojimbo, but he dodged successfully under the building. In my second turn, I suddenly remembered the HVTs, and sent Yojimbo after them. He fired his contender at good range at this one, and undignifiedly succumbed to the stun pistol, effectively ending his turn. This was extremely annoying, but thankfully Frank had failed to deal with the remnants of my Harris, so I accomplished the task with the Tanko instead, killing both HVTs with its shock CC weapon, and then returning to a starting point. This was riskier than with Yojimbo because of the hacker Auto Sergeant overwatching the HVTs, but he whiffed his hacking roll and my Tanko escaped unharmed. My missile launcher Tanko took out the rooftop flamethrower bot, which had to move in order to take a shot at Yojimbo, and resumed his ARO position, overwatching most of the board. My remaining orders had been intended for Yojimbo, so instead I spent them on Cordelia with the aim of fixing Scarface and the TR bot. Unfortunately, my rotten luck with repair rolls resurfaced, and he finished the turn with 2 hit points and a dead TR bot beside him. Frank's second turn began with him reforming a fire team around Deferson and killing the missile launcher Tanko. He then reactivated the Montesa, taking it along my backline from left to right, killing this HVT as well as Cordelia and the exposed Digger. And then he began to pop out from behind this building to take shots at Scarface. However, he probably erred here because he spent several orders doing this, but none killing this Kaisotsu beforehand. And though he did manage to put a wound on Scarface, this Kaisotsu actually put the final wound to the Montesa and stopped him from taking Scarface down, which would have been for good this time. In my final turn, I thought about the army victory points and legged it for safety. I used my lieutenant in order to put my lieutenant into suppressive fire, ran my tag, who's back down to 1 hit point, all the way to this corner, and followed suit as far as I could with the Yojimbo and my surviving Tanko. This was as far as I could get the Tanko. I brought my Yuan on to add another 8 points, and I stood him near the surviving HVT just in case Frank could get something over there. So I stood him here prone, where he could look but not be seen from afar because of the railing. I was ahead on lieutenant kills and HVTs, and while I reckon I was probably slightly behind on army points, I didn't need that to win, and it'd only take a lucky arrow to fix it anyway. So I was hopeful that I'd won the game and potentially the tournament. In the final turn of the game, Frank scaled this building with Deferson and took aim at my lieutenant. Even suppressive fire wasn't sufficient to keep him alive, and suddenly the score wasn't looking so flash. Still, he was wary of this Tanko's Flamen Spear, and my HVT managed to dodge out of line of fire of his long-range assassination attempts. And with the game ending with about 150 points of Ikari Company left on the table, I was hopeful that the late Lieutenant kill wouldn't change the result. Sadly, it wasn't to be. I hadn't done enough damage, and the Daiyokai's implosion was fatal to my score. I had 142 points left on the table, and Frank had 178. And with army points being worth more objective points than HVTs, and our lieutenant kills now being equal, he won 7-6. At least I got the losing bonus point, and going in I would certainly have been happy with 2 major wins and a tight loss. But I was still annoyed at the instant death of my Daiyokai, as well as Cordelia's inability to roll below 14 twice in a row. My best piece in this game was the missile launcher Tanko, probably. An honourable mention goes to the other Tanko, who actually did the job of dispatching the 2 HVTs. Everything paled in comparison to the efforts of the Knight of Montesa and Deferson, however. In the final tournament rankings, Frank finished second with 14 tournament points, while I came third with 12, and Matt came fourth with 10 after winning his final game. The tournament was actually won by Tom's Nomads with 14 tournament points after getting a round 1 bye and never playing anyone else in the top 4. Not that he's undeserving, of course, considering he went 5 from 5 at CanCon. In terms of the narrative, despite the fact that the Coalition managed to blow up the facility and confiscate its research, Dr. Heck escaped by releasing his backup clones, giving the Brotherhood a minor victory overall. In hindsight, I honestly don't think Cordelia benefits much from being in a duo with Scarface, so if I were to run this list again, I'd probably re-downgrade those 2 Kosopsu to remotes and spend those points on a Yao Zhao peripheral to plant near the TR bot. Aside from that, the list performed admirably, though I'm not 100% sure the Ninja wouldn't have been a better option for the 3rd game. I'd probably have deployed it near the police cars, from whence it might have been able to take a shot at assassinating Frank's 2nd lieutenant. But of course, without the TR bot, the game would have been very different, so it's difficult to speculate. Overall MVP for the entire tournament goes to the Sierra Drone bot, the Total Reaction bot. It all but won me the first game and performed extremely strongly in the 2nd and 3rd games. Scarface, the Daiokai, the Tankos, and Yojimbo all performed well in 2 of the missions, but flopped in 1 each, making it hard to elevate them above the TR bot. All of my games were a lot of fun against great opponents, and just like with CanCon, I finished on a bit of a high. I had a great trip back with Matt as well. I'd like to thank all of my opponents and the tournament organiser Ryan, as well as Matt and Link for helping me prepare for the tournament.